The sun hung low in the Pennsylvania sky as Rowena Hale's black Escalade sputtered to a halt in front of a run-down garage. The sign above the bay read Silas Auto and Tire, half of it faded from time and rain. Rowena sat still for a moment, gripping the wheel. This wasn't where people like her stopped. But the dashboard flashed red, the car had gone silent, and her 5-year-old daughter was beginning to fuss in the back seat. There was no signal, no assistant, no driver. Just her. And the past she thought she'd buried a lifetime ago. The garage door groaned open, and a man stepped into view. Silas Mercer. Broad-shouldered, covered in grease, his brown hair tucked under a worn cap. When he looked up and met her eyes, Rowena felt time collapse. 6 years hadn't erased the sharp lines of his jaw or the quiet intensity behind his gaze. She felt her stomach twist, but before she could say anything, the back door of the SUV flung open, and Tessa darted out. "Daddy!" The word exploded into the air like a spark in dry brush. Silas flinched as the child ran to him, throwing her arms around his leg. The wrench slipped from his hand, clanging onto the concrete floor. He stared down at the girl, confused, his breath caught in his throat. Rowena's heels clicked furiously across the pavement as she rushed forward, her voice tight with alarm. "Tessa, no!" But the girl only clung tighter, her cheek pressed to the man's grease-streaked jeans, whispering, "I remember you." Rowena's heart thundered in her chest. She reached down, pulling her daughter back with trembling hands. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly to Silas, not meeting his eyes. "She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying." But Silas didn't look away from the girl. His face was pale, unreadable. "It's all right," he said quietly, though something was breaking open in his voice. "Sometimes, kids know things we forget." Tessa stared up at him with a kind of certainty that was impossible to ignore. Rowena tightened her grip on her daughter's hand, but the damage was done. The crack had formed. The door between past and present, once locked, now stood open just a sliver. And as Silas watched them walk away toward the waiting bench, a single question began clawing at the back of his mind. What if she's mine? Rowena couldn't stop glancing through the smudged glass window of the waiting area. Her fingers toyed with the strap of her designer bag, but her eyes remained fixed on the man outside. Silas was back under the SUV, tightening bolts like nothing had happened. Like her daughter hadn't just called him Daddy in front of both of them. But Rowena knew better. She'd seen the look in his eyes. That flicker of something deeper than shock. Recognition. Maybe even guilt. Tessa sat on the cracked vinyl bench beside her, legs swinging, drawing shapes in the foggy window with her finger. "He smells like the bear you gave me," she said suddenly. "The one I sleep with." Rowena's breath caught. That stuffed bear had been a quiet regret, bought just before she left Silas behind without a word. She'd told herself it was silly, just a sentimental habit. But now, hearing Tessa say it out loud, it felt like a tether between past and present had just snapped taut. Outside, Silas stood and wiped his hands. His eyes lifted, locking with Rowena's through the glass. She looked away, heart pounding, but she didn't miss the way he paused, as if he had something to say, something buried for years but begging to come out. He didn't move toward her. Not yet. He just stood there, watching. Rowena hadn't planned for this. She hadn't even told Tessa about her real father. Not the name, not the story, not the heartbreak. She had married into wealth, comfort, and status. People in her new world didn't ask questions about the past. Especially not about the mechanic she'd left behind when life handed her a ticket to a better future. But now the truth was bubbling up, in the eyes of a 5-year-old who knew nothing about lies. Silas finally walked inside, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. He stopped a few feet from her, wiping his hands again even though they were already clean. "She called me Daddy," he said low. Not accusing, just trying to understand. Is she mine? The question lingered in the air like smoke. Tessa looked between them, sensing something big but not quite knowing what. Rowena opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands trembled in her lap. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her mind, but never like this. Never with her daughter watching. Never in the middle of a garage surrounded by the ghosts of who they used to be. Rowena stared at Silas like he'd just said something in a language she no longer understood. Is she mine? The words echoed in her ears, louder than the clanging tools, louder than the hum of the engine he'd just fixed. She had prepared herself for anger, accusations, maybe even rejection, but not this quiet, steady voice asking for the truth. And certainly not in front of the child whose very existence had been her secret. Tessa leaned against her side, humming softly, unaware that her presence had just set fire to a long-buried truth. Rowena's throat tightened. "This isn't the place," she said finally, her voice low, controlled. Silas didn't flinch. He just nodded once, then walked back to the bay door, giving her space, but not distance. His eyes, heavy with unspoken pain, lingered on the child one more time before he turned away. The ride home was quiet. Tessa had fallen asleep in the back seat, thumb tucked into her mouth, her curls damp with sweat. Rowena gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, thoughts crashing like waves. Silas Mercer. That name had lived in the corners of her memory for years, unspoken but not forgotten. He had been her escape, her rebellion, her first real love, and the one she had walked away from when the weight of her parents' expectations became too much. Back then, no one knew she was pregnant. She had found out 2 weeks after she'd left town. Terrified, ashamed, and determined to erase the part of her life that didn't fit the world she was trying to enter. She had married Wesley Hale 3 months later, convincing herself it was for the best. He was powerful, respected, and would never question a child as long as she gave him the image he craved. But Wesley was gone now. A heart attack at 49. And all the lies Rowena had buried with him were clawing their way back to the surface. That night, after putting Tessa to bed, Rowena poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table in silence. Her phone rested in front of her. She'd searched for Silas before, once, twice, but always talked herself out of reaching out. Now he knew. Or at least, he suspected. She had seen it in his face. She reached for the phone, then stopped. If she called him now, everything would change. Again. And this time, there'd be no going back. The next morning, Silas stood at the shop's coffee machine, staring into his half-empty mug like it might give him answers. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the girl with the golden curls and wide, certain eyes. Tessa. Her name had burned itself into his brain the moment Rowena said it. And now, the question he'd asked wasn't fading. It was growing louder. Stronger. Is she mine? Silas had never been the type to chase ghosts. Life had taught him that some things stay gone for a reason. But Tessa wasn't a ghost. She was flesh and blood, standing no taller than his workbench, looking at him like she knew him. Not just from some fantasy or storybook, but from something older, something real. That shook him more than he was willing to admit. At the edge of town, Rowena parked in front of the local pharmacy, the engine still running. She hadn't meant to drive here. Her hands had steered the car before her mind caught up. This town held too many memories. The diner they once snuck into at midnight. The river where Silas taught her how to skip stones. She could still hear his laugh, deep, reckless, honest. A sound she hadn't heard in 6 years. She pressed her fingers to her lips as if to silence the memory. Rowena stepped inside and bought a cheap burner phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed. Not his number. She didn't even know it anymore. Instead, she called someone she hadn't spoken to since before the wedding. June, Silas's younger sister. They were never close, but Rowena hoped the name on the screen would still mean something. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello. It's Rowena," she whispered. "I need to talk to Silas." There was a pause. A long one. "You have nerve," June finally said. Her voice was sharper now, harder than Rowena remembered. 6 years. You disappear, leave him broken, and now you call like it's nothing. Rowena's throat closed. "It's about a child," she said softly. "About my daughter." Silence again. Only this time, June didn't hang up. Meanwhile, Silas stepped out into the morning sun, wiping his hands on his jeans. Something felt off. Restless. Like the ground under his feet was shifting. And when he opened the shop's mailbox, a small envelope fell out. No stamp. Just his name, written in handwriting he hadn't seen in years. He stared at it, heart pounding. Silas held the envelope like it might burn through his fingers. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Rowena. He hadn't seen her name in years, not written out like this, so careful, almost nervous. His pulse drummed in his ears as he walked back inside the shop and sat heavily on the stool by his workbench. For a long moment, he didn't move. Just stared. Then, with a deep breath, he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Folded once. Neat, but trembling. He unfolded it slowly. The words were short, no more than 10 sentences, but each one landed like a punch to the chest. "Silas, I don't know how to say this in person. I was scared then. I'm scared now. Her name is Tessa. She's 5, and I think she might be yours. I know I should have told you sooner. You deserved that. But I couldn't face what I left behind. I need you to know, it was never because you weren't enough. I just wasn't brave enough. If you want to talk, I'll be at my father's old house tonight. Alone." Silas read the letter twice. Then a third time. His hand trembled as he set it down. The name hit him like a freight train. Tessa. It wasn't a maybe anymore. She was his. And Rowena had known all along. He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. Rage clawed at his chest, but it was tangled with heartbreak, regret, and something far deeper, grief for all the years lost. 5 birthdays. First steps. First words. He hadn't just missed them. He hadn't even known he was supposed to be there. That kind of absence wasn't something you could fix with a conversation. Still, part of him ached to try. That night came faster than expected. The air had cooled, and a pale moon lit the old Hale family house like a stage waiting for confrontation. Silas parked a block away, nerves frayed, the letter still folded in his jacket pocket. The porch light was on. The curtains were drawn. Inside that house was the woman who broke him, and the answer to a hole he never knew he carried. He stepped toward the door, and before he could knock, it opened. Rowena stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, no polished armor. Just her. Real, stripped bare. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Silas took one step forward, his boots crunching the gravel beneath. She didn't move. Didn't invite him in. But she didn't close the door either. "I didn't come here to scream," he said quietly, voice like gravel soaked in rain. "I came because I read the letter, and because I deserve to look you in the eye when you tell me the truth." Rowena's lips parted, but her voice caught in her throat. The silence between them was louder than any argument could have been. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." The living room hadn't changed much from her childhood, worn hardwood floors, the old grandfather clock ticking in the corner like a reminder of everything they couldn't rewind. Silas sat on the edge of the couch, his elbows on his knees. Rowena stood by the window, her back turned, watching the trees sway in the wind. "I wasn't supposed to come back here," she said. "I swore I wouldn't. But I didn't expect Tessa to recognize you." "She knew," Silas said, more to himself than to her. "She felt it. That kind of knowing, you can't fake that." Rowena turned around slowly. Her eyes were red, but dry. "She asks about her father sometimes. I never knew what to say. And every time I thought I was ready to tell her, I wasn't." Silas stood, taking a step closer. "You had every right to leave me, Rowena. I was just some nobody with oil under his nails and nothing to offer but a heart you didn't think was enough." His voice cracked. "But you didn't just leave me. You erased me. You made me a ghost in my own child's life." Rowena's breath hitched. She looked at him, really looked, not the man she left, but the man he'd become. "You're right," she said, barely above a whisper. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want her to know you. If you still want that." For a beat, neither of them moved. Then Silas looked toward the stairs, and his voice dropped low. "Where is she now?" Rowena hesitated before answering. "She's asleep," she said, voice soft. "Upstairs. She doesn't know I wrote you. Doesn't know you're here." Silas nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. Part of him wanted to run up the stairs, burst through the door and hold her. The other part, the quieter, more wounded part, feared what he might see in her eyes. Would she still call him Daddy? Or had that moment already faded, like a child's dream? "I don't want to confuse her," Rowena continued. "She's still so young, Silas. And I don't know how much she understands. What she feels, it's instinct. But I'm not sure she's ready for the truth." Silas looked at her, jaw tight. "She was ready when she saw me at the garage." The words hung heavy in the air. "Maybe we're the ones who aren't." Upstairs, the house was quiet. The kind of stillness that makes every footstep sound louder. Rowena led him down the hallway, pausing at the last door on the left. A string of paper butterflies hung from the doorknob. She placed her hand gently on it but didn't turn. "She likes bedtime stories," she whispered. "Sometimes she asks if the daddy in them will come visit her one day." Silas's chest tightened. He reached out and touched the doorframe, his fingers brushing the worn paint. "Can I see her? Just see her?" Rowena hesitated, then nodded. She opened the door slowly. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a nightlight in the shape of a moon. Tessa lay curled beneath a floral blanket, one arm cradling a faded teddy bear. Her chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of sleep. Silas stepped inside like he was walking on sacred ground. He didn't speak, didn't touch her, just stood beside the bed and looked down at the little girl who had changed everything. In the glow of the nightlight, he saw it, the shape of her nose, the curve of her chin. But it was her eyes, even closed in sleep, that undid him. Eyes like his. He took a shaky breath, then turned to Rowena, his voice raw. "I missed all of this. All of her." She swallowed hard but said nothing. As they stood there in silence, a small voice broke the quiet. Tessa stirred, blinking slowly, and looked up at him. "Are you real this time?" Silas dropped to one knee, his voice caught somewhere between fear and wonder. "Yeah," he said gently, "I'm real this time." Tessa sat up, rubbing her eyes. Her curls were tangled from sleep, her cheeks warm and pink. She stared at him, unsure, then leaned a little closer. "You look like my bear," she whispered, as if sharing a secret. Silas let out a quiet laugh, one that broke at the edges. "That bear's got good taste, then." Rowena stood frozen in the doorway, hands clasped tightly. She had imagined this moment so many times, a disaster, a rejection, tears. But not this. Not the quiet stillness, not the slow unfolding of trust between a man and the child he never knew he'd missed. It was beautiful, and it hurt more than she could have ever prepared for. Tessa reached out, touching the sleeve of Silas's shirt like she was making sure he wouldn't disappear if she blinked. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Her voice was so small it nearly vanished. Silas closed his eyes for a second. That question hit harder than anything Rowena had said. "I didn't know about you," he replied softly. "I should have. I wish I had. If I had known, I would have come running." She nodded, as if accepting the answer, even if she didn't fully understand it. Then, without warning, she leaned forward and hugged him. It wasn't careful or hesitant. It was complete. Her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, her face tucked beneath his chin. Silas held her like he'd been holding that space in his arms for years. Rowena looked away, eyes shimmering. They sat like that for a long time, as if neither of them wanted to let go. Finally, Silas whispered, "Can I come back tomorrow? Maybe tell you a bedtime story myself?" Tessa pulled back, smiled, and nodded. "But it has to be about someone who finds something they thought they'd lost." Silas swallowed hard, emotions pushing against his voice. "I think I know just the one." As Rowena tucked Tessa back in, Silas stepped out into the hallway, his heart heavier and fuller than it had ever been. He glanced back one last time, watching as his daughter drifted off, still smiling in her sleep. The door clicked shut behind him. Downstairs, Rowena was waiting. And this time, she was the one with a question. Silas stood at the bottom of the stairs, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, as Rowena descended slowly. Her eyes were red, not from fresh tears, but from the weight of everything she hadn't said in years. The silence between them wasn't hostile. Not anymore. It was heavy, yes, but it was also fragile, like something that might shatter or heal depending on the next word spoken. "I should have told you," Rowena said softly, standing across from him. "No prelude. No excuses. I wrote letters, a dozen of them. Never sent one. I kept telling myself I was protecting her. Protecting you. But maybe I was just protecting myself." Her voice cracked near the end, and she didn't bother to hide it. Silas looked at her for a long time before answering. "I would have been a mess, Rowena. I'll be honest. I was broke, angry at the world, still figuring out who the hell I was. But I would have shown up. Every day. Even if I had to crawl." His voice trembled as he spoke, but he didn't look away. "You didn't give me that chance." "I know," she whispered, barely audible. "And I'm not asking you to forget that. I'm not even sure you can forgive it. But I'm here now. And I want to do this the right way. For her." She stepped a little closer, her hands trembling at her sides. "You don't have to forgive me, Silas. Just don't walk away from her. She needs you." Silas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I'm not going anywhere. I meant it. If she wants stories, I'll bring a library. If she wants to know who I am, I'll tell her everything. But you and me." He paused, eyes searching hers. "I don't know what that means anymore." Rowena nodded slowly. "I'm not sure either," she said. "But maybe it doesn't have to mean anything right now. Maybe it's just two people learning how to be parents. Together. For her." The air between them shifted, not lighter, not easier, but honest. As Silas turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Tomorrow night. Same time." Rowena smiled faintly. "She'll be waiting." Silas opened the door, the cool air brushing against his face. But before he stepped out, she asked quietly, "Do you think we could ever start again?" The following evening, the house felt different. The kind of quiet that came not from absence, but from anticipation. Rowena stood by the window, watching as Silas's truck pulled up in front of the house again. Second night in a row. Her heart beat slower this time. Not from fear. From something warmer. Something like relief. She opened the door before he reached it. He looked tired, but lighter. In his hands was a small wooden box, polished, worn around the edges. Tessa peeked out from behind Rowena, bouncing on her heels. "He's here," she squealed, rushing forward. Silas crouched just in time to catch her in his arms, his laughter full and real. "Of course I'm here," he said. "Told you I don't break promises." Inside, they settled into the living room. The lights were low, the night soft around them. Silas handed Tessa the box. She opened it slowly, with both hands like it was something sacred. Inside was a faded leather-bound book. "This," Silas said, "was mine when I was your age. My mom used to read it to me every night. I thought, maybe now it could be ours." Tessa looked up at him, wide-eyed. "Can we start tonight?" He nodded. "Absolutely." They sat together on the couch, Silas in the middle, Tessa curled against him, Rowena on the other side, quiet but present. Silas opened the book and began to read. His voice was calm and deep, steady like it had always known how to do this. Tessa listened with her full heart. No fidgeting. No interruptions. Only stillness and wonder. Rowena watched them from the corner of her eye, the lump in her throat growing. She had never imagined this moment. Not really. And now, seeing it in front of her, she realized how much she had been afraid of wanting it. But it wasn't perfect. And that's what made it real. No staged conversations. No magical transformation. Just a man who had shown up. Just a girl who had reached out. And a woman still learning to forgive herself. When the story ended, Tessa was already half asleep. Silas lifted her gently, cradling her with care, and Rowena led him up the stairs. Together, they tucked her in. As he pulled the blanket up to her chin, Tessa murmured, "I'm glad you found me." Silas froze for a beat. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Me too, kiddo." Back downstairs, Rowena poured 2 cups of tea. No wine. No pretense. Just something warm between them. She handed him a mug and sat beside him on the couch. Silence stretched, but this time it wasn't empty. "Do you think we could ever start again?" she asked softly. Silas looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "We already did." If this story touched your heart like it did ours, give it a like so we know it reached you. And if you'd like to hear more emotional stories like this one, consider subscribing to the channel. We've got more coming, and some may just stay with you long after they end.